Well, finally made it out for a night of shooting stars. It's been just such a hectic year for me. I've just been so busy with life and also struggling with motivation a little bit. And sometimes, motivation for me comes a lot from what other astrophotographers are doing, but sometimes there's nothing like just burning a wad of cash on getting a new toy, which is what brings me here tonight. Recently, there's been a lot of new lenses. Well, recently, in the last 12 to 18 months, there's been a lot of new lenses coming out with very, very particular astrophotography applications. So Sigma has released an f1.4 14mm and 20mm lens that's available on at least L-mount and E-mount. Sony's obviously got their 14mm, 20, 24 and 35mm. All of those are G masters except for the 20mm, which is a G. And then you've got Viltrox here, who have just found their little niche in that market with a 16mm, the only 16mm full frame lens in the Sony ecosystem. And Viltrox hasn't been too bad, but I've always steered clear of the cheaper lenses just because their optical performance up into the corners has always been a bit lacking. I've found that with my Samyang lens, love those lenses, but when you're using them wide open, they do suffer generally from noticeable chromatic aberration. And if you're doing particularly track shots, that can become a bigger issue. So you really have to stop those down. But anyway, I started poking around, having a look at the reviews for this 16mm, and the usual such suspects like Chris Frost and Dustin Abbott. And Dustin's review, he kept on dropping comparisons to Sony G Master level of build quality. So yeah, I just slapped my cash down straight away and got this on pre-order. And I've had it for about a week now. I haven't had a chance to get to test it out in the night sky, which I'm doing right now. But it's got some, apart from the unique focal length, it's got another couple of unique features, at least to the Sony E-Mount system. It has this LCD screen on top, which I'm actually think I'm going to find very handy when trying to dial in focus. It won't allow you to focus perfectly. You're still going to have to use your screen for that, but it will give you an indicator of, so you can quickly at a glance check what f-stop and where the focus plane is sitting. And probably more uniquely, and it's quite similar to the 24mm Samyang Tiny Prime, it has two function buttons, and the top button just functions as a focus hold, which is pretty generic, but the bottom button in manual focus mode, you can set it to a preset focal plane distance. So you could set it up so you've got pinpoint on your stars and set that as a focus point. And then it's just a matter of tapping that button and you'll get perfect infinity focus with the lens. So I've found that really helpful with the 24mm Samyang, and I'm sure I'm going to use it a lot with this one as well, because it does save a little bit of time from faffing about zooming in on stars and getting them pinpoint and whatnot. And it's also just good to know that if you absolutely, or accidentally rather, bump the focus ring, it's an easy fix. So what I'm going to do tonight, I've got my 14mm Sony G Master, and I've got my Sony 20mm G lens. They're probably the closest comparison to what this lens is going for, or the market this is going for, just because, well, the 14mm Sigma lens you pretty much need to mortgage your house for, and the here in Australia the 20mm Sigma is well over the $1,000 mark, somewhere around $1,400. So this, I think, I'm trying to remember, it was about $900 Australian delivered. So it's a very compelling relative to the competition. Still expensive, but yeah, still, if it delivers on the rave reviews from the YouTube ecosphere, then yeah, it'll be very good. So what I'm going to do, going to just probably take some portrait shots. I don't know if you can see, but the Milky Way's already risen up, so not quite perfectly dark here yet, but pretty close. Now, what we have here is just a a hill with some stones and rocks and whatnot. Not going to win any landscape astrophotography awards tonight, but just giving it a test. Going to give each of those 3 lenses a run at wide open at the maximum exposure time for this A7R II 42 megapixel sensor, and shoot it at ISO 3200 or 6400. We'll see how we go. And then I'm going to put my tracker on, hopefully, and going to just give it a 30-second burst while being tracked. I'm not going to try and push it too far over 30 seconds just because I'm surrounded by trees, so getting a good alignment is going to be a bit harder, and I'm just going to have to do a phone-based alignment, which should be accurate enough at 30 seconds. So I'll do portrait orientation just because the Milky Way is rising up off that horizon quite a lot already, and we'll then get all the images back on the computer at home, and we'll do a side-by-side comparison and see how this stacks up against the competition. So great night out shooting the stars the other night. I've now got those images I took loaded up on my computer here, and I've got the ones taken wide open at f1.8 here. You can see the darker ones are going to be the untracked, which were taken at whatever photo pills told me the maximum exposure time for taking photos of that focal length on a Sony A7R II were, and the ones where you can actually see a little bit of detail in the thumbnails are the tracked 30-second shots. We'll do a compare of the untracked first. You'll have to forgive me, these are full raw images we're looking at, so it will batter my my computer here as far as performance. So bear with me on that. So loading up first, from left to right, we've got the Sony 20mm 1.8 shooting at 8 seconds, which was the closest value in camera for exposure time without going over the NPF value. So 20mm, then the 16mm Viltrox in the middle at 10 seconds, and the Sony G Master 14mm at 13 seconds on the right here. So we'll bang on in, zoom in right into about 150%, and right in the middle of the Milky Way there, we've got the Lagoon and Trifid Nebula that we can do a bit of a one-to-one comparison on in these shots. Now already I can see I didn't quite nail focus on this 20mm at f1.8, so apologies for that, but we can still see it there, though it's not a perfect examination, that there's no obvious deformation, but we are dealing with focus issues, but there's no chromatic aberration or anything like that, which is really good. Moving on to the Viltrox, we can see a little bit of chromatic aberration sinking in there, though nothing terrible, and the star shape is actually pretty good. Likewise with the Sony 14mm G Master, you can see there's a little bit of chromatic aberration again, pretty comparable to the much cheaper Viltrox 16mm though. So we'll zoom back out, head back up into the corners here, extreme top right corner of the frame, and this is where you'll often find lens gremlins if it's going to have any. So obviously not going to be able to do a one-to-one comparison here due to the fairly significant difference in field of view. But on the left you can see the Sony 20mm, no obvious deformations there. Chromatic aberration looks all in check, just that issue that didn't quite nail focus. Moving on to the Sigma, you can see there's a little bit of astigmatism here. Very, very little in the way of chromatic aberration. I would say it's actually a pretty good result, and especially when you sort of move on over into the much more expensive, again, the Sony G Master 14mm. It's actually looks to be just a touch worse in terms of astigmatism performance here. So that's it for the wide open untracked. We'll move on to the tracked wide open. So we'll close those, hit the compare button, and wait for a second for the computer to open those up. So back out again. Now I was trying to actually use this tree in the left to sort of give a bit of an indicator of how the field of view changes from shot to shot with each of the different lenses, but it's actually obscured the stars up in the top left hand corner, which I did hope I could examine, but no matter, we'll just continue on as we were. So again, track shots all looking pretty good to me, to be honest. So we'll zoom in again to the Lagoon and Trifid Nebula in the middle of the Milky Way there at 150%. Again, yeah, apologies, not quite a nailed focus on the Sony 20mm there. Apologies for that. What we can see here on the Viltrox is just probably similar amounts of chromatic aberration, and same with the Sony G Master 14mm, which is good. That's not a compounding a deformation or artifact in the image, so that's still very workable to remove that inside of your post-processing workflows. So we'll move right up into the, got a bit excited there, up into the top right hand corner again, as far as we can go, and again we're still seeing those astigmatism deformations in the 16mm and the 14mm. The 20mm is looking pretty good apart from the focus issue, and still even with the much longer 30-second exposure time, nothing to speak of at all really as far as chromatic aberration is concerned. So we'll move on now to the f2.8 shots. So again, similar thing, we'll have a look at the untracked shots first. Get those spun up. Here we go. We'll zoom out, have a bit of a look at what these look like. So you can see here f2.8. I'm using the same NPF-based exposure time maximums there. We'll zoom in, have a look at this, the Lagoon and Trifid Nebula again, see if we can get those more or less matched up so we can do a bit of a comparison. And we do have sharp focus now on the Sony, which is, thank God I got one good, but yeah, we can actually see from the lack of the focus in those first one, there is a little bit of, it looks like a little bit of chromatic aberration, but tiny amounts, like we're not talking anything really. But what's really interesting though is this middle one, the Viltrox, has virtually gotten rid of all the chromatic aberration it had at wide open, which is, if this trend continues, is very promising for those who like to track their Milky Way shots anyway. And again, over here on the Sony G Master 14mm, I would say that it's got a little bit more chromatic aberration going on here than what the Viltrox does. I'd say almost the Viltrox at 2.8 is probably the best rendering image as far as deformation or aberration. So we'll zoom back out here and up into the top corner and hit into 150%, get right up in that top corner, and we can see here probably got a little smidge of coma on the 20mm at f2.8, but you know, this is at 150%. You would not notice this outside of pixel peeping like we're doing now. And again, in the Viltrox, it's very good to see here that we have virtually gotten rid of all that astigmatism. Just got probably a little tiny bit of a coma smear there, nothing to write home about. Same again with the Sony G Master 14mm here. Yeah, really good performances across the board, but remembering price differences here are quite significant. So we'll have a look at the tracked shots at f2.8 now, and looking forward to this because if the Viltrox continues this trend, as I was speaking before, then it's yeah, it's really putting in a good show. So again, that's we've got a few plane trails there, but other than that, all looking pretty good. We'll zoom into the center, into the Trifid and Lagoon Nebula at 150%. And we can see here that we'll start with the Sony 20mm. Yeah, looking very good. Perhaps just, yeah, that touch, just a real light touch of chromatic aberration, but yeah, essentially perfect rendering. And look at the Viltrox in the middle here. I can't even, maybe just real hints if you've got a nitpick, but that's not chromatic aberration. This is just the color, natural color of the Lagoon Nebula here. So this is looking superb, this Viltrox at 2.8 in the center of frame. And if we have a look at the Sony G Master 14mm here, it's, you know, it's also rendering really well, but yeah, just got that touch of chromatic aberration, those purple fringes around the stars. But again, pixel peeping is the only way you're going to see that, and also still very manageable in post-processing workflows. We'll head up to 150% right up into the corners, and again, just slight coma smears on that 20mm Sony here. The Viltrox is rendering really well here. It's you can just see they're not quite perfectly pinpoint, but at this magnification that it is, and for this wide of a focal length, it is an amazing result. Because if you look across here to the 14mm Sony G Master. They are very comparable in star shape out in the corners here. So just zooming back out here again now, just going off that very quick sort of assessment of just these sample shots, you have got to say the Viltrox is a stunning, punching well above its weight. Like, I would still have to say that my preference would be for the overall, if I could have one of these three lenses, I would, just on optical quality, I still think the 20mm is probably got the edge, if you can manage to focus properly, but I think it's probably got the edge. However, the 16mm Viltrox, considering its cost, I think it was around that $750 mark, Australian delivered. But yeah, if you're just looking for, you know, a starter or an intermediate lens, then yeah, the Viltrox here is definitely worth considering. Anyway, I hope that little comparison has been of some use to you. Look forward to seeing comments, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have down below. Yeah, once again, thanks for watching.